America calls itself the land of the free, the shining city on a hill, a place where liberty rings and justice rules. But behind that polished myth lies a shadow, one stitched together with surveillance, secrets, and state-sanctioned fear. This is the story they never taught you in school. A story not of enemies abroad, but of the war waged within. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, something sinister began brewing inside the very institution meant to protect American democracy, the FBI. Under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI created a program that operated with no oversight, no accountability, and no conscience. Its name? COINTELPRO. Short for Counterintelligence Program. Its mission? Not to stop foreign spies or terrorists, but to silence voices of change. To sabotage civil rights leaders, discredit anti-war activists, and destroy black liberation movements. The targets weren't criminals. They were dreamers, leaders, people who believed that America could be better, more equal, more honest, more just. And for that they were watched, followed, blackmailed, publicly humiliated, sometimes killed. COINTELPRO didn't just monitor dissent, it manufactured chaos. Letters forged to break apart marriages. Rumors planted to spark betrayal among allies. Entire movements unraveled by lies. All of it, hidden behind the badge of law enforcement. This wasn't about justice. It was about control. And the most terrifying part? Most Americans had no idea it was happening. COINTELPRO was a war fought in the shadows. Against truth, against unity, against progress. And though the files were eventually leaked, the scars it left behind still bleed. If you've ever wondered why real change feels impossible, why every powerful voice seems to vanish, why unity always seems just out of reach, then you need to understand COINTELPRO. Because once you see how far they went to keep the people divided, you'll never look at freedom the same way again. This is not conspiracy. This is declassified history. And what you're about to hear will change how you see the country you live in. So if you're ready to dive deeper, to see beyond the mask, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us as we uncover the dark truth of COINTELPRO. They marched peacefully. They preached unity. They cried out for dignity in a country that chained them in silence. But to the FBI, black leaders weren't citizens. They were threats. COINTELPRO labeled the civil rights movement as a form of black extremism. Their crime? Demanding equality. It started with surveillance. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the man who dreamed of peace, was wiretapped, his phones bugged, his private life exposed like a public stage. The FBI mailed him anonymous letters, threatened him with his own secrets, even tried to push him toward suicide. Yes, suicide. Because they feared the power of his words more than the violence of the Klan. But King wasn't alone. Malcolm X was followed everywhere. Every speech, every meeting, every breath was recorded. They tried to turn his allies against him. And when he left the Nation of Islam, the FBI watched, waiting for the fracture to become a crack, then a bullet. And then came the Black Panther Party. Young, angry, educated. They didn't beg for change. They demanded it. Free breakfast programs for children. Community patrols to protect black neighborhoods from racist police. Health clinics, education, resistance. The Panthers terrified the establishment because they united people. So the FBI did what it always does when it feels threatened. It lied. It infiltrated. It broke them from within. They called them terrorists. They planted evidence. They sparked infighting and bloody conflict. This wasn't law enforcement, it was psychological warfare. J. Edgar Hoover himself declared the Black Panthers the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States. Not because they killed, but because they organized, because they uplifted, because they made oppressed people believe they had power. In America, that's the real crime. COINTELPRO wasn't just about stopping riots, it was about stopping hope. If a black man dared to dream out loud, the system moved to mute him. And when the dream couldn't be silenced, they sent the police, guns drawn, under cover of night. In 1969, a 21-year-old leader named Fred Hampton was asleep beside his pregnant girlfriend. By dawn he was dead, shot in his bed by Chicago police, after the FBI gave them the floor plans. But we'll get to that. First, we need to understand how COINTELPRO tore movements apart from the inside. Not with guns, but with betrayal. What's more dangerous than an enemy outside your walls? An enemy inside your home, wearing your colors, speaking your language, pretending to be your brother. COINTELPRO didn't just spy from afar, it infiltrated the very soul of resistance. It planted men and women inside movements, not to observe but to destroy. They weren't just agents. They were friends, roommates, lovers, comrades, people you trusted with your life, until they handed it to the FBI. They came with smiles. They came with slogans. They sat beside you in planning meetings, only to walk out and report everything. It wasn't just surveillance, it was emotional warfare. They spread rumors to spark conflict. They forged letters to pit leaders against one another. They whispered lies, planted paranoia, and watched entire organizations collapse under the weight of doubt. You see, COINTELPRO understood something chilling. You don't have to kill a movement, if you can make it kill itself. The Black Panther Party wasn't destroyed by bullets alone. It was broken by internal suspicion, much of it manufactured by the FBI. They exploited every weakness. Every disagreement became a crisis. Every mistake was magnified, echoed, and turned into betrayal. Imagine fighting for your people, and not knowing if the person standing next to you is waiting to stab you in the back, because they were told you might do it first. This wasn't about justice. It was a game of divide and conquer, waged in the minds and hearts of revolutionaries. Even the most loyal voices began to falter. Movements turned inward. Meetings ended in shouting. Trust evaporated. And in the chaos the system smiled. Because a fractured resistance can't build anything. It can't uplift. It can't organize. It can't win. COINTELPRO was never just a file cabinet full of memos. It was a cancer, slow, strategic, and devastating. And for every movement that died, the FBI left behind a trail of silence and shame. But perhaps no death was more symbolic, more calculated, than what happened to Fred Hampton. A 21-year-old revolutionary. A voice that shook the walls of injustice. What happened to him wasn't betrayal. It was an execution. It was still dark when they came. December 4, 1969. Chicago. A small apartment on Monroe Street. Inside, Fred Hampton, 21 years old, fast asleep beside his pregnant fiancée. The night before, he had given a fiery speech about revolution, unity, and a world beyond racism and poverty. He wasn't just a speaker, he was a builder. He brought together Black, white, and Latino activists in what he called the Rainbow Coalition. Not just words, action. Free breakfast programs, community health clinics, education, self-defense, a vision bigger than himself. But to the FBI, Hampton was more than a problem, he was a prophet. And prophets in America don't live long. They couldn't break him, so they decided to eliminate him. An FBI informant named William O'Neill had infiltrated Hampton's inner circle. He smiled. He shook hands. He took notes. And then he handed over a detailed floor plan of Hampton's apartment to the FBI. They marked the spot where Hampton would be sleeping. The raid was labeled a shootout. But let's be clear, only one side fired. Over 90 bullets were shot by the police. One came from the Panthers, after the gunfire started. Fred Hampton never stood a chance. Witnesses say he didn't even wake up. They say he was drugged the night before, slipped something by the very informant who betrayed him. As bullets ripped through the walls, someone heard an officer say, "He's good and dead now." Fred Hampton was 21. The child in his girlfriend's womb would never meet his father. This wasn't justice. It wasn't a raid. It was a government-sanctioned execution. And still, no one was held accountable. Because COINTELPRO didn't just kill Fred Hampton. It tried to kill everything he stood for. Hope, unity, empowerment. They feared him because he could unite the poor, across color lines, against the powers that be. And they were right to fear him. Because Fred Hampton saw through the illusion. He once said, "You can kill a revolutionary but you can't kill the revolution." But they tried. And in the silence that followed his death, something inside Black America cracked. Because if they could murder someone like Fred, in his sleep, what protection did anyone have? The dream didn't die that night. But it bled, heavily. And what bled with it, was trust. The files were never supposed to be seen. COINTELPRO was meant to stay buried, deep beneath red tape and silence. But in 1971, a group of activists broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. They weren't looking for weapons. They were looking for truth. What they found were files, hundreds of them. Names, targets, tactics. Proof of what many had long suspected. That the US government had declared war on its own people. That war wasn't against criminals. It was against ideas. Against unity. Against hope. The public outcry was fierce. Senate hearings were held. COINTELPRO was officially shut down. But here's the part no one wants to admit. The tactics never disappeared. They just changed their name. Surveillance became digital. Infiltration became algorithmic. And movements today still find themselves shadowed by power. Black Lives Matter activists placed on watch lists. Whistleblowers hunted. Protesters labeled as threats to national security. Sound familiar? We were told COINTELPRO was a dark chapter in history. But what if it was just a blueprint? Ask yourself, why are those who speak for the voiceless still silenced? Why are leaders who unite across racial and class lines still painted as radicals? Why does every movement for justice feel like it's running uphill, while the machinery of oppression remains well-oiled and invisible? Because COINTELPRO was never just about files and memos. It was about maintaining control, by any means necessary. And that control? It still breathes. You won't find it in history books. You won't hear about it in school. But its fingerprints are everywhere. In the silence after gunshots, in the broken families, in the paranoia still lingering in activist circles. This is your reminder. Just because they tell you you're free, doesn't mean they've stopped watching. If history can be erased, then injustice can be repeated. But if we remember, if we speak, if we question, if we refuse to forget, then maybe, just maybe, we can build something stronger than fear. You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. If this story moved you, if it made you question what freedom really means, then share it, talk about it, and never let them bury it again. Because the only way to silence COINTELPRO is to keep telling the truth it tried to destroy.